Well, thank you for letting me talk today. This is something that is very, I think, important to me, and hopefully you'll see that as we progress. My topic today is the four-way test, and I want to start the four-way test with a little story. Now, before I tell you the story, though, I want to tell you that the story is going to have a story within the story. And I don't have permission to tell this story within the story, so I'm not going to tell you who this is. But if you find out who this is, it is not because I have told you. Is that clear? Are we clear on that? I'm going to tell you the story within the story to get us started. Because the four-way test says, is it the truth? I'm going to tell you a true story. Now, I know this story is true because I heard it, but the story within the story, I think, is true because the guy that told the story, in the story, told the story. I heard him tell the story. And some things, there are just some things you just cannot make up. Last year, 2017, we, the Rotary Club, were involved in the Barry Stess Memorial Christmas Basket Program. Last year in 2017. We were standing, we had finished collating the boxes one night, and there were 4 Rotarians standing in a circle, talking. 3 of us, were old and ugly. The other one was of a little fairer complexion. We were up at this place, as you know, standing in a circle. And all of a sudden, the conversation began to revolve around dogs. And so one of those Rotarians said, well, let me tell you a story about dogs. He said, I was recruited by my family to take care of their dog. It's a dog that had a collar on it with the invisible fence deal. And he said, I got there, and somehow during my time, the battery went dead. So I went down to the store and got a new battery for it, brought it back, put it in the collar, but he said, then I had a little issue because I didn't know if the collar was good or not.
There we go.
And so he said, I thought, well, since the way that we know that the collar is good is we put it around the dog's neck, and they walk across the line, I just figured that that was the way that we did that. And so, 10 seconds later, he's picking himself up off the ground. He realized, with the collar around his neck, that the battery was indeed good.
Steve Rowland.
I did it. I
just want you to know, I told that story anonymously.
don't ever try. It will take you to your knees.
You know, we all do things that are crazy, right? We just have crazy. The older you get, it seems like the crazier thing. But that's not the craziness that I'm concerned about. The craziness that I'm concerned about is this craziness that's going on in our culture today. Have you noticed the social chaos in just about every aspect of life? Whether it's the political sphere, whether it's the athletic sphere, whether it's the church sphere, whether it's people depressed, suicide, our kids on drugs, it just seems mass killings. Do you know that's not normal for people to go into a school or into a bar, into an organization, and just blow people away? What on earth is going on? Sometimes I think, what is happening to our civilization? Well, I'm convinced that the reason that we're sliding the way we're sliding is because we've abandoned the principles of the four-way test and the principles underneath of the principles here. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. What on earth is going on? But I believe if we as Rotarians will take this test and the principles there and live this out, we really can create a culture of community and civility, and a culture that's worth, specifically my main concern, is the culture that we're passing on to the next generation that's coming behind us. We've inherited a great civilization, and I want to pass that on to the next generation. That is really the concern. So, let's talk a little bit about the history of the four-way test. Now, Herb Taylor was a historian from Chicago in the 1930s and the early 30s. you know Rotary started in Chicago, was the first club, Paul Harris, and Herb Taylor was one of those guys in the 30s. What happened, Herb Taylor was in the packaged grocery business. That was his classification. He left that, and he took on the headship, or the CEO, Ness, became CEO of Club Aluminum Company in 1932. In 1932, Club Aluminum Company was on its way down. It was headed, it was in the red, it was just not going to make it. Herb Taylor takes over Club Aluminum Company, and he said, how on earth are we going to come out of this? Let me read what he said. He said, to win our way out of this situation, I realized that we must be morally and ethically strong. I knew that in right, there was might. I felt that if we could get our employees to think right, they would do right. We needed some sort of ethical yardstick that everybody in the company could memorize and apply to what we thought, said, and did in our relations to others. So one morning, I leaned over my desk, rested my head in my hands. In a few moments, I reached for a white paper card and wrote down that which had come to me in 24 words. That was the four-way test that he came up with. Now, let me ask you a question. What was going on in 1932 in America? Was that a time of social ease or a social chaos? It was very much a time of social chaos, wasn't it? The Great Depression was going on. And isn't it amazing that in the midst of the Great Depression, Herb Taylor said there are some ethical principles upon which we can build this country, not only the country, but this business, basically the same principles upon which our nation was founded, actually. We can use those principles in order to turn this thing around. And in 5 years, the Club Aluminum Company, in the midst of the Depression, was not only thriving, surviving, but it was actually thriving in the midst of that. And I'm convinced that in the midst of our social chaos that's going on today, if we as Rotarians will hold to these principles, we can actually create a culture that thrives as well, not just survives. Hopefully our culture will survive. I'm not sure about that sometimes. Now, that's actually the goal of Rotary, is to build a culture in which human beings can flourish and not be destroyed. That's actually what our goal is. And so what I'm going to do is I want to use, you recognize this picture, it's the Cy Tucker Field over at South Oldham High School. What I want to do is I want to give you a picture today and implant in your mind, so every time that you see this goalpost at South Oldham, you'll remember the four-way test and the possibility that we have of living that out. So I want to use the goalpost as the goal of Rotary to build a flourishing culture and build that around, my talk around this, this goalpost. So what is the first issue of the four-way test? Now the four-way test actually centers around two main themes. The first of those is the fact that in the first statement, is it the truth? So it's around the truth that I want to talk a little bit this morning about the first theme of the four-way test. Now, what do we mean when we say something is the truth? What does that mean? Well, what that means is that we have some kind of point of reference to which to judge whether something is good or bad, something is right or wrong. We have a point of reference. It's like we have a measuring tape. It's the ethical yardstick that Herb Taylor was talking about. You know what a measuring tape is. It's something we use in the construction industry, right? We measure tables, it's 30 inches tall. We measure people. Practically perfect in every way. But it gives us a point of reference. The truth gives us a point of reference to know whether something is good, something is bad, something is right, something is wrong. Just think about what would happen if we didn't use this in the construction industry. Let's say, for instance, hypothetically, that there's a Rotary club, gets involved in a new park in the area. They have to renovate a couple buildings. And so one of the things that they have to do in renovating that building is to put a new floor in one of those buildings. And so they go to one of their members, let's call him Roger. And they say, Roger, we want you to put a new floor in this building for us. And Roger said, okay, I'll do that. So Roger goes and he gets down the floor, he's got the flooring, and he begins to lay the floor. Roger says, you know what would be a lot easier if I had a cutter. So he calls up his friend, just hypothetically, let's say Peter, and he says, Peter, I need you to run the saw for me so to cut the boards. And so Roger's on his knees and he's laying the flooring. He says, Peter, I need one that's 36 and a half. So Peter goes outside, takes out his metric tape, cuts one, brings it back in. He says, Roger says, what's going on? It's not the right size. I said, I need one 36 and a half. Peter goes, oh, well, okay, maybe he's talking about hands. Cuts another board, he brings it in the right. Now, let me just ask you a question. Is that going to build goodwill? Is that going to be better friendships? How long do you think, just hypothetically, how long do you think Roger's patience is going to last? Because they don't have some point of reference, a standard. Does that make sense? And that's the same thing it is with our ethics. We need a point of reference or a standard, and that's what the truth gives to us, is a point of reference. Now, in our culture today, our point of reference, this has been changed a little bit, and this is the trouble that we're into as a culture and a civilization, because we no longer think of truth as a point of reference. Instead, we think of it as a point of preference. And there's a big difference in that. Anybody like ice cream? Yeah. See, today, oftentimes truth is looked at as just choosing a flavor of ice cream. I like chocolate, you like strawberry. Anybody like blizzards? Now, I have enough money on this card, and I will give it to anybody who can tell me what the best, absolute best blizzard that Dairy Queen makes. If you can tell me what that is, I will give you a free one.
I love them.
The Oreo blizzard is really good, Joe, but that is not the best.
Peanut butter cup.
The peanut butter cup is really good.
M&M.
It's not the best. It's not M&M.
Georgia fudge.
According to my taste, the best is Reese's.
It's not Reese's, though.
But according to my taste,
not
that's the
Reese's.
measure.
What do you think, Ron?
For all these greenhorns out there, it's Georgia nut fudge.
What? It's not Georgia nut fudge. Do you know what the
Oh.
best blizzard is at Dairy Queen that they
All
make?
of them.
Is this one.
Uh-oh.
It's the turtle pecan cluster.
Turtle pecan.
It is.
Cluster.
It's the turtle pecan cluster blizzard. Except what you have to do is you have to take the caramel out of it and you have to put peanut butter in it. So you're close, it's just not quite on it. That's the best one that they make. Do you know that? It's the best one. Turtle
I do
pecan cluster. Take the caramel out, put the... But in today's world, that's kind of how we look at truth today. It's just whatever my preference is. That's what's true for me. So what's true for me may not be true for you. But what that does is it creates all kinds of chaos, and we're going to look at that here in just a minute. And instability and a mess in our culture. Now, since I was the only one that knew what this is,
By your preference.
I get to keep that.
That's your truth.
That's my truth. Now,
That's cute.
what happens if a culture or a civilization loses the idea of truth? And there is no point of reference or standard. What happens? What are you left with? How do you know what's right and wrong if we have no point of reference? I'll tell you how you figure that out. The only thing you have left is power in a culture. This is how that works. I hope that when I put this in my pocket, you said, it's not fair. You can't do that. What do you mean? You said stuff like that. There's no way we could have found that out. But you know the truth is, right now, I make the rules. Right? Because I'm in charge. I'm talking. I have the microphone, so I get to make the rules. And I say, that is the best one. Because I have the power. Does that make sense? Do you see what I'm saying? And that's exactly what's going on in our culture today when we remove any kind of objective reality or standard from the culture or truth, ethical behavior. We have no way to tell right, wrong, good, bad, fair, not fair, beneficial, not beneficial. We have no way to tell whether it's better to take a gun into school or it's better to take a book into school. We have no way to tell that. So our culture's just left. You see what I'm saying? That's what happens. Now, since you were the closest, Thomas, and I am really a fair guy.
Wow. Let's go try one of those pecan.
It's turtle pecan cluster. You got to take the caramel out and put peanut butter. Just technically, you know. In fact, I'll come over and I'll show you.
You'll want to borrow the card, so.
Maybe you can join me.
Okay. Well, let's look at this a little closer. Because this is a really big issue in our culture today. This issue of whether or not my truth is my truth, your truth is your truth. This is a big issue. We're facing this on every sphere of our existence in our civilization. So let me go a little farther with this. Can I have your help just a minute? Would you come up and help me? If you'll just stand right there. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to say anything.
Come up here.
Dylan, would you help me just a minute? All you have to do is just stand here. If you'll stand right here. And Dylan, if you'll stand right beside her. I'm going to give the gavel. Now, this gavel represents the power. This is how this power issue works. Look at this. Have you ever wanted the gavel? You know, you can get that gavel if you'll talk to Joe.
That's okay.
Let's say that Jeanette has the gavel. And let's say that Dylan wants the gavel. Now, we have a law in this country that says Dylan cannot go get the gavel from her and take it from her without her permission, right? What do we call that if he were to do that?
Stealing.
We call that stealing. We have a call, he could go to jail, right, for stealing something from her. But let's say, hypothetically, let's say that we remove that principle from our culture. And we don't operate on it anymore. Now, who's going to get the gavel?
Dylan.
Why is Dylan going to get the gavel?
He's bigger, stronger.
Because he's bigger and stronger. That's right. If we remove the...
That's fine.
I would dispute that in every way. I think she used that gavel
He's
on
no sweet
him.
You see, if we let that idea be removed from our culture, all we're left with is power to determine what is right and what is wrong. Whether that power is wrapped up in a person's physical strength, as in this illustration, or who has the biggest gun, or who has the microphone, or politically, who has 51% of the vote. Did you know that's why our country was not founded as a pure democracy? Because our founding fathers were afraid of that very issue. They didn't want that. So they founded it as a republic instead, and there's a big difference in that. Because they didn't want it just to revolve around this issue of power. They had some higher authority there. Does that make sense? We talk about the gavel? That's why I think this is such a big issue in our culture today, because it's that as we lose that issue, the idea of truth, we're just left in this chaotic state. Now, back to the goalpost illustration. We have this post of truth upon which the test rests. But there's something that I want to go a little deeper in that, and I want to, in the next few minutes, I'm going to get a little bit on my soapbox, if that's okay. But what I'm going to tell you is really the truth of the matter. It's just going to seem a little soapboxy. But I want to go just a little bit deeper on that, because if you go over to South Oldham, I'm convinced, I didn't go digging, but I know this is true, that if you were to dig on the underneath of the goalpost, they didn't just dig a big hole out there and fill it with water, did they? No, they didn't fill it with sand. What do you think they filled it with?
Concrete.
Yeah, they filled it with concrete. Ron went out there, well, I guess Ron did, or somebody like him, right? Poured the concrete. So underneath of the post of truth, there is some kind of concrete there that does not move. Now, when you get to talking about truth and these type of issues, you have to get into the metaphysical realm a little bit or into the spiritual realm a little bit. And anything that you put down there as the concrete, whatever you base your truth upon, that becomes your God. Sorry, I know, I said it. I brought God into a public arena. You're not supposed to do that anymore. But you really can't get away from that. Because that issue of God sets the foundation for where this truth is. That's what the early Rotarians thought. That's the way our country was founded. Did you know that? It's founded with some idea that there's an objective reality out there, a person called God. That's why in the Declaration of Independence, we have all people are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. The rights of man do not come from the state. They come from God at heart. So do the principles of truth and what is right. That's where we get those principles from. Does that make sense?
Yep.
He forms the concrete foundation for what we know to be right and wrong, true and not true, but you remove that. What is the concept of God being done today in our culture? Is it being inserted? No, it's been taken away, isn't it? That foundation is being destroyed. And when that foundation destroys, truth falls, and so does the rest of our four-way test. We're going to look at it. Does that make sense? You must keep that foundation. Now, one step farther on that. When I say the word God, I hope, as you do with all speakers that get up here and talk to you, or anything you hear on the internet, or anything you hear, you need to be asking the question, what do you mean by that? What exactly does that mean? Because if good communication is going to take place, we must be defining our terms in the same way, right? Are you talking about the God of Islam, who is Allah? Are you talking about Buddha? Are you talking about the Jewish God? Are you talking about any of the 330 million gods of India, of Hinduism? Well, which one are you talking about? Well, which one did the Founding Fathers talk about? Which one did the early Rotarians talk about? Do I know? It was actually Jesus Christ. Yeah. See, that's why we in Rotarians, have you ever wondered why we pray? The Rotarians Institute of Prayer? That's what we're doing. We're asking the God of Jesus Christ to come in and help us to put these principles into operation in our lives so that we operate our culture according to a culture of civility. Does that make sense? That's what we're doing. That's why they instituted the prayer. It was interesting because Rotary's going through a little bit of a change, a little bit of a switch here. In 2015, the Washington Post, who is hardly a bastion of religious promotion, wrote an article about a Northern Virginia Rotary Club, and the article revolved around the fact of their prayer because of other religions coming in, trying to be more eclectic and pluralistic. And they said they were beginning to change that prayer, and the Washington Post said they're changing it even though traditionally it was a Christian prayer. Isn't that amazing? That was the basis for that. And so we have to determine whether or not we're going to remain with that basis or not. That's my soapbox. Now, I want to move into the second major theme. The first major theme of the four-way test is the issue of truth. But as you look at the other three aspects of the theme, there's another of the test. There's another theme that comes out. Does anybody tell me what that is? What do all three of those statements revolve around?
Other people.
Pardon?
Other people.
That's exactly right. Other people. The Rotary four-way test is based upon the idea that people have intrinsic value, that humans are important. That's why we don't raise money to stop polio in other countries in Asian carp. Or we don't send money to stop, we haven't built picnic tables. We didn't build that for the ants, right? Although that will probably happen. They'll probably come and have a picnic. We built that for people, right? That's what we're doing. That's what the Rotary is all about. It's about people. Because we believe people have intrinsic human value. Where does that idea come from? The idea comes from the same idea that we get truth from. There's a God that created people in his image, made them important. That's where we get that idea. If we lose this foundation, then we lose that very idea also. And do you know what happens when people lose that culture, civilizations lose the idea of truth and the human value? You get what we had in the 20th century. And the 20th century became the bloodiest century on record. Did you know that? Because of governments that were based upon a godless foundation. They did what they wanted to do. They removed truth from their culture. And when truth is removed from their culture, people get oppressed, killed, burned, crushed, slaughtered. It happened in China under Mao. It happened in Stalin. It happened in Russia. It happened in Hitler. It happened in Cambodia. And those are just the major leaders. There's a whole host of minor leaguers. And as our civilization removes this idea of truth, God out of the culture, we'll go down the same path. That's what's happened with all the chaos that's going on. We have no reference point to determine what is good and bad, right and wrong. But the Rotarians have it right here in their forward test. Does that make sense? Okay. That's why it's important. You and I have an opportunity and a possibility to create a culture of civility and community. Have you noticed how uncivil our public discourse has become? Did you notice that in the political arena in the last 3 or 4 months? That's not a one side or other side. Everybody's guilty of that. But that comes from a disconnect from this foundation. When we lose the foundation, we'll lose the whole structure. Does that make sense? That's what it is. So that's why it's important for us as Rotarians to understand the test, to know the principles, and to put them into operation in our life, because they really are the foundation for the culture that we want to build and the culture that we want to send to the next generation.